All right, Genesis chapter 40 and 41, starting with 40, the cupbearer and the baker. Now, where we last left off at, Joseph had been thrown in prison because Potiphar's wife was lying on his name, so threw him in prison. But God continued to stay in his corner and bless him, and Joseph basically became the prison warden. So this is now picking up after that. So, chapter 40, the cupbearer and the baker. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials, who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there was no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand." "This is what it means," Joseph said to him. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, "I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." "This is what it means," Joseph said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh."
Oh no, this can't be.
Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation.
No. Wait. Wait.
The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Chapter 41, Pharaoh's dreams. When 2 full years had passed, 2 years, the cupbearer forgot about Joseph for 2 years. Pharaoh had a dream. He was standing by the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows, ugly and gaunt, came up out of the Nile and stood beside those on the riverbank. And the cows that were ugly and gaunt ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell asleep again and had a second dream. 7 heads of grain, healthy and good, were growing on a single stalk. After them 7 other heads of grain sprouted, thin and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy full heads. Then Pharaoh woke up. It had been a dream. In the morning his mind was troubled, so he sent for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but no one could interpret them for him. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. He told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream, and things turned out exactly as he had interpreted them to us. I was restored to my position, and the other man was impaled." So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. I cannot do it. Joseph replied to Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, in my dream I am standing on the bank of the Nile, when out of the river there came up 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed among the reeds. After them 7 other cows came up, scrawny and very ugly and lean. I had never seen such ugly cows in all the land of Egypt. The lean, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat cows that came up first, but even after they ate them, no one could tell that they had done so. They looked just as ugly as before. Then I woke up. In my dream, I saw 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing on a single stalk. After them, 7 other heads sprouted, withered and thin, and scorched by the east wind. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 good heads. I told this to the magicians, but none of them could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. And now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man, and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country, to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and to all his officials, so Pharaoh asked them, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Joseph in charge of Egypt. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck.
Now, before you start hating, ask yourself, be honest. Ain't I'm clean, no?
He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, make way! Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift hand or foot in all Egypt. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphanath-Paneah, and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, to be his wife, and Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt.
I done came up, got my name up. So when they speak of who blinged up, I'm who they bring up. Come up.
Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in the cities. In each city, he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, it is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. The second son he named Ephraim and said, it is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. The 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, go to Joseph and do what he tells you. When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians. For the famine was severe throughout Egypt, and all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere. Chapter 40, verses 1 through 2. In prison, Joseph came into contact with 2 other prisoners, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Since both the cupbearer and the baker handled Pharaoh's food and drink, perhaps Pharaoh was concerned about an assassination attempt since capital punishment was on the table. Verse 3 through 4. It just so happened that the cupbearer and baker were put in custody in the house where Joseph was confined, but what at first looks like a strange coincidence might have been intentional. It was the captain of the guards who assigned Joseph to these two men, and this term, captain of the guards, is different than the one used for the warden running the prison. That means it could refer to Potiphar. If that is the case, it's possible Potiphar did not believe the charge his wife had brought against Joseph. Not only would that mean that he refrained from executing Joseph, but also that he, knowing well Joseph's managerial skills, personally placed other prisoners under Joseph's control. Verse 5 through 7. When we're suffering, we tend to be self-absorbed, but God intends to use our suffering for the sake of others. Joseph could have been having a pity party while he waited on God to minister to him. Instead, he noticed that the cupbearer and baker looked distraught. He expressed concern for their emotional well-being, asking, "Why do you look so sad today?" Even in his misery, Joseph was making time to minister to the hurting. See 2 Corinthians 1, 3 through 7. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in our troubles so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. For just as we share abundantly in the sufferings of Christ, so also our comfort abounds through Christ. If we are distressed, it is for your comfort and salvation. If we are comforted, it is for your comfort, which produces in you patient endurance of the same sufferings we suffer. And our hope for you is firm, because we know that just as you share in our sufferings, so also you share in our comfort. And unbeknownst to him, by serving during his own suffering, Joseph was putting himself back on the path toward future blessing. Chapter 8. The problem for these two prisoners was the same: troubling dreams. Joseph immediately recognized that God was at work in arranging his encounter with the pair. He displayed confidence in God by reminding them that only God can interpret dreams. Most striking, however, is his confidence that God would use him to reveal the dream's meanings. In our suffering, a common temptation is to stop believing that God will use us. Joseph's example prompts us not to fall into that wrong thinking. Verse 9 through 13. The cupbearer relayed his dream first, standing in front of a vine with 3 branches. He took some of the grapes from the vine, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. This turned out to be good news for the cupbearer, as Joseph said the dream meant he would be restored to his position in just 3 days. Verse 14 through 15. Joseph was no fool, as he tried to use the connections he had to get himself out of prison. When all goes well for you, he told the cupbearer, show kindness to me by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. Joseph pointed out that he and the cupbearer were both wrongfully convicted, so he must have been hopeful that his favor would soon lead to release. Verse 16 through 19. The baker went next, explaining a dream in which 3 baskets of white bread were on his head, with birds swooping down to eat the bread. The verdict for the baker wasn't favorable. In 3 days, Pharaoh would hang the baker, and the birds would eat the flesh off of his body. Verse 20 through 23. 3 days later, everything happened just as Joseph had explained. Pharaoh restored the chief cupbearer to his original position and hanged the chief baker. For a moment, it looked like Joseph was about to get his get-out-of-jail-free card, yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. Joseph's detour, then, wasn't quite finished. This is how our circumstances go at times, too. Victory appears to be right on the horizon, then suddenly life takes a hard left, and the joy we thought was coming disappears. Through his experiences, however, Joseph continued to trust God. Though people may leave us and forget us, God never will. Chapter 41, verse 1. Between Joseph interpreting the dreams of the prisoners and his next chance to get out of jail, 2 years had passed. We know that Joseph was 30 when Pharaoh let him out of jail, which means there was a gap of 13 years between Joseph's initial dream and him living out his destiny. At the close of chapter 40, Joseph was 28 years old and had been in a detour for 11 years already. Sitting in his dingy dungeon, he waited and waited for the knock on the door that would announce his freedom, but for 2 years that knock never came. Joseph's life hadn't planned out as he had intended, but God was still up to something. While Joseph waited for God to act in the prison, God was at work in some place unexpected, the king's bedroom. Pharaoh had a dream that he couldn't figure out. Verse 2 through 8. In the king's dream, 7 sick cows were eating 7 healthy cows, and 7 ugly heads of grain were eating 7 healthy heads of grain. Pharaoh didn't understand the vision, so he summoned all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Though he called in the professionals, no one could interpret the dreams for him. This is a reminder that when God is setting something up for his glory, he won't let human wisdom come up with an answer. As the Apostle Paul would say centuries later, God has chosen what is foolish in the world to shame the wise, and God has chosen what is weak in the world to shame the strong. 1 Corinthians 1:27. If we're wise in the ways of the world, we may climb certain ladders to success, but eventually we'll come across problems that only godly wisdom can solve. I'd rather be a fool to the world with God's wisdom in my heart than the other way around. Verse 9 through 14. The wise men couldn't interpret the dreams, but their discussion was overheard by the cupbearer. The light bulb finally went off for him, and he realized he had left the interpreter of dreams languishing in prison. So the cupbearer told Pharaoh all about Joseph and his gift for dream interpretation, and Pharaoh sent for Joseph. For 2 years, Joseph had waited, but when God was ready to move, he moved in a hurry. Sometimes when it seems that God isn't doing anything at all, he will change our circumstances in a heartbeat. Of course, God is active all along. We simply aren't aware of it until it's time for his purpose to be revealed, at a time when our development has been completed. See Psalms 105:17 through 19. And he sent a man before them, Joseph, sold as a slave. They bruised his feet with shackles. His neck was put in irons, till what he foretold came to pass, till the word of the Lord proved him true. Verse 15 through 16. Pharaoh told Joseph his predicament, and Joseph's reply shows that he had been letting God work on him during his imprisonment. It is God who will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Few people would have cried foul if Joseph took sole credit for his dream interpretation gift. In fact, Pharaoh seemed to assume that the power was within Joseph, but Joseph was keeping God at the center of his life and central to his conversation. God's presence had been his constant companion, so God's preeminence was always on his mind. Verse 17 through 31. Pharaoh recounted the 2 dreams to Joseph, who explained that both dreams mean the same thing. God was about to send 7 years of great abundance to Egypt, symbolized by the 7 fat cows and 7 healthy heads of grain, followed by 7 years of famine, symbolized by the thin cows and ugly grain. The famine would be so severe, Joseph warned, that the abundance in the land would not be remembered because of the famine. Verse 32. Here, Joseph pointed out a principle that is often true throughout Scripture. When God intends to do something, he will confirm his word with 2 or 3 witnesses. In this case, since the dream was given twice to Pharaoh, Joseph knew the matter had been determined by God. Similarly, we may often wonder which way God is leading us, but when we feel Scripture speaking to our hearts and our brothers and sisters in Christ start to back up that message in unison, we can be sure that God is confirming his plan by repeating it. Verse 33 through 36. Pharaoh had only asked Joseph for a little dream interpretation. Joseph dutifully gave it, but then he kept right on going, advising Pharaoh on how to handle the impending crisis. Joseph's plan was to take 1/5 of the harvest of the land during the rich years and to stockpile it as a reserve for the land during the 7 years of famine. To make this massive undertaking work, though, someone savvy would have to oversee the task. Verse 37 through 45. Pharaoh immediately recognized that Joseph was the man for the job. Not only did he have wisdom to see things spiritually, but he could also make right conclusions based on that wisdom. This led Pharaoh to elevate Joseph to become his second in command. With that privilege came enormous benefits. Joseph had an entire team of servants dedicated to helping him. He was given symbols of his exalted position, a signet ring with which he could sign in Pharaoh's name, as well as beautiful linen garments and gold jewelry. He was even given a wife. What a sudden change of circumstances. In a single day, he went from rags to riches, from the pit to the palace. Verse 46 through 49. The 7 years of abundance came just as Joseph had predicted. So he began storing all the excess food in the land of Egypt to prepare for the coming famine. Evidently, he excelled at this because as soon as he stored up grain in such abundance that he stopped measuring it because it was beyond measure. Verse 50 through 52, even though Joseph had been given an Egyptian wife and an Egyptian name, and even though it had been 13 years since he had seen his family, he did not forget his heritage. When his wife gave birth to 2 sons, Joseph gave them Hebrew names. The first, Manasseh, sounds like the Hebrew word for forget, because God made Joseph forget his hardship. The second, Ephraim, sounds like the word fruitful, because God made him fruitful in the land of his affliction. Pharaoh may have been the hand that pulled Joseph out of prison, but Joseph looked past that hand to the loving arm of God who was guiding him all along. Verse 53 through 57. After the 7 years of plenty, the 7 years of famine began. In Egypt alone, there was food, so Egypt became the breadbasket of the world, and Joseph was in charge of selling food to people from every land, including the land where his family lived. And that is the end of Genesis chapter 40 and 41. I hope everybody learned something. Now things are going to start really, really moving fast now as we're getting near to the end of the book of Genesis here. So next up in chapters 42 and 43, which is what we are covering next, Joseph meets his brothers again, and he plays this little game with them to determine how repentant they are for what they did to him. Even though he's like forgiven them, he's just seeing if they've changed as people, because the brothers, they go to Egypt to get food because of the famine. So, well, you'll end up seeing what happens next. So God bless everyone. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see y'all next time.